My name is Pinkney. I'm a criminologist, urban youth specialist, and a lecturer at a local university in Birmingham. One of the things that's often asked when we're looking at this issue of violence is what can be done? How do we engage? What are the strategies, the methods in which we need to engage or embark on that's going to reduce the violence within society? The first thing I always say to people is, do we understand violence? Do you understand the culture of violence? Because when you begin to understand the culture of violence, you'll first understand is that violence has always existed. Violence is nothing new. So when we talk about issues of gangs and youth violence, it did not start 20, 30 years ago. Hundreds of years, and even probably thousands of years old, with this issue around groups and territory. Groups and the way in which they behave towards another based on those geographical or territorial locations wherever in the world. So I say let's deal with and understand with the culture of violence, first and foremost. I think secondly, it's about, well, what is the approach? What should the approach look like and who's responsible for that approach? And I say, as it relates to issues around youth violence, it's multi-layered. There's not one particular angle that we can come from. So let me just go through some of the things that we can do as a society to reduce the violence. I always say it starts at home, meaning parents, family members, individuals that live within the community that associate to particular families. We need to do parenting and go back to the right parenting. What does it mean to be a parent? What does it mean to be a mother? What does it mean to be a father in the particular climate that we live in? What are the responsibilities? What are the relationships? What is a relationship? How do we build those relationships? How do we talk? How do we communicate? What are the ways that we communicate? Or is it a situation that children disappear at school all day, they come back at 5 o'clock and there's no engagement whatsoever? They're on a tablet, they're on the iPad, they're upstairs playing a computer game, there's no interaction other than, here's your food, here's some money, what did you do at school today, and nothing else. And I understand that we live in a society now where we're working around the clock. So it's very difficult for parents now to have that intimacy with their children because there's so many strains within society that enable them to engage with so many other things at one particular point. But we need to go back to parenting. As men and women, as fathers and mothers, we need to start having conversations. We need to start having real conversations about domestic violence. We need to start having real conversations about the impact of violence on children. We need to start talking about issues that pertain to those young people, their children, such as trauma, looking at issues around mental health, depression, anxiety, disorders that may cause them or want them to self-harm, self-medicate, that they turn to alcohol and substance misuse. So a lot can take place within family. So we as a society need to look at family and not assume that every single family within our country understands how to be a family. We also need to look at community. What do I mean by community? Those that are in prominent positions within the community. Community leaders, faith leaders also have a responsibility. Why? Because they too need to understand the culture of violence and how that might impact the individuals that live within their communities. So if you've got a religious institution within your community and you are not seeking to engage with the young people or the families that are in those communities that might be impacted by violence, drugs, substance misuse, and other forms of deviant or criminal behavior, then you also might be responsible for also assisting in terms of the continuous cycle of violence within those communities. Many organizations as religious institutions have massive spaces. Have you considered how that space should be used? Or is it a space that's just used for worship and to bury, to christen, to baptize, to bless, to do funerals, to do weddings? Is that what it's for? Or should it also be used for community engagement, where those spaces also can be used by individuals that might be from your congregation, that might have specialist knowledge and specialist skills that they can offer them same families in those communities where there might be issues of violence. Charity. How much charity do we give in religious institutions to issues around the world as it relates to poverty? How much food do we give out to the homeless? Amazing work that we do in terms of charity as it relates to religious institutions. But what about poverty of the mind? Because our young people are misguided. Our young people don't have an understanding of where they're going, and they don't understand their purpose. And if the religious institutions around these particular cities are invested in trying to get people to find their true purpose, then part of that purpose is also about establishing and helping those young people with the finance that we may be able to support with. Community leaders. You might be involved in engaging with individuals that are from a range of sectors, whether that's in mental health, whether that is in education, whether that is in just health services or youth provisions. Do you understand the culture of violence and how that operates within your communities? What projects are you doing with the community to shift the thinking of violence? What are you doing with families? What are you allowing for those families to be involved in that get them to shift their thinking of violence? The police, they also have a role to play too. How do the police engage with community? How many reports have come since the McPherson report, the Lammy report, and other reports that have come out that kind of tell community the same thing? And a perspective might be that I'm 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched compared to my friend that lives down the road. And there's this thought that I'm being targeted because of the color of my skin compared to anything else. So we have to start to have very new and interesting conversations, and open and honest conversations about the impact of communities feeling oppressed by the police. The police talk about the concept of the wall of silence. Part of the reason why there's a wall of silence is because people don't feel safe. They don't feel that the police can adequately support them in the dissemination of information if there's a situation that needs to be solved. So policy needs to change. It's not just about implementation as it looks like individuals that might come from a range of backgrounds involved in the police, but strategies and implementation that's linked to policy and legislation also needs to change. We need to address issue of stereotyping, labeling, ensuring that individuals that come from particular communities are not in fear. Do you understand trauma? Do you understand symbolic violence? That when you show up with your uniform, that might have a psychological impact on them same communities that feel that they're being oppressed, them same communities that feel that there's an injustice. Because there's an array of situations and issues that have happened with community and the police, where individuals may have lost their lives, and the impact of that may cause a ripple effect where individuals don't want to engage with police because of those factors of not being solved. So it becomes important that we understand our roles and what that means within community. Local authority, those that are involved in some of the bigger provisions, social services, mental health services, and other services that are funded by the local authority. Do you understand the culture of violence? What are your methods and strategies to engage with these issues? Do you have adequate training? What is your relationship like with individuals from the community that have an understanding of the communities in which they come from? What specialists are you attached to? What experts are you attached to in a range of fields? Whether it's to do with gang violence, youth crime, sexual exploitation, extremism, radicalization, far-right extremism, grooming, online type of behaviors? Who are the individuals that you're connected to that's forever updating you with information and real life experiences that enable you to shape your policy and practice? The government. What can the government do? The government can do a lot. Because we're talking about, do we recognize as a society the violence? Do we understand that the culture of violence is somewhat like a disease? Where we're seeing now violence not just in London, not just in the Midlands, not just in Liverpool and Manchester, but it's now picking up in places like Hertfordshire, Hull, and different parts of the country, where now everybody's saying, well, this problem of violence is an issue for us all. So how do we engage? Is it just funding? Is it just punitive measures? Or do we need to consider different types of approaches? So do we need to look at other countries that have adopted certain types of approaches to reduce the violence? We can go to places like Chicago. We can go to places like Glasgow that have adopted what is called a public health approach to respond to violence. But bearing that in mind, understanding that our country might be complex and might be different, so it's not necessarily following the same strategy, but do we understand those strategies and understand how they made it according to their context, and can we apply that here within the UK? And how we do that is we trust community. We enable those that are specialists and leaders in areas across the country to come together that can give a well-informed response and idea on how we can engage with some of these issues. Because clearly what we're seeing is disjointment in terms of pockets of excellent work, pockets of excellent ideas, but the country as a whole do not understand that violence is a disease and violence needs to be treated as such. And until we as a society start to understand those things, then our solution and our strategy might be somewhat different. But we also need to talk about consumerism and capitalism, because we don't ever talk about that. We don't ever talk about the investments that multinational corporations also benefit from violence and trauma. So we're talking about filming industries here. We're talking about fashion brands. We're talking about radio. We're talking about documentary and film that are targeted particular communities that give out that same narrative, that same perpetuation of the narrative that individuals involved in certain types of behaviors only come from certain groups, which contributes to then the racialization of crime within this country. So what accountability is taken when a multinational corporation come up with a product and they sell that in the same community, knowing that there's issues of high deprivation, knowing that individuals are potentially going to risk their lives in order to engage in certain types of behaviors in order to buy those particular products. How many incidents have taken place even this year with organizations or companies like Nike or Puma that have advertised certain types of products in communities and campaigns that look at getting individuals involved in certain types of behaviors. So let's sell a balaclava in the middle of London to young people, knowing that they're not going to ski. Let's sell or create a campaign around the selling of drugs in the heart of London, knowing that young people live in that particular demographic that might be involved in the selling or the taking of Class A substances. But let's forget about the issues that exist within their society or their communities, but we need to promote this brand that individuals are going to buy, purchase and consume their goods. Individuals on radio that create this platform or these platforms where young people can come onto their platforms and spit their best 16 bars. Amazing. It's an opportunity. But when you allow those individuals to talk about chaos, destruction, their nihilism, and they perpetuate that on the radio waves, and if they don't make it and have to deal with the consequences of what they narrate on your platforms, Where is the investment from all of these multinational corporations? When someone dies, how many times have you heard individuals leave radio shows and within 2 or 3 days they've been killed in the streets of the cities of where they come from? Where are you at the funeral? Where are you at the youth centres? Could you invest in strategies, campaigns that seek to reduce violence? So you notice and you recognize that there's not one person to blame. We could have a conversation all day about different elements and different things, and there's probably things that you're watching or thinking right now, thinking we also need that too, and I'm going to agree with you, but we don't have enough time to talk about all of those different things. But what I'm showing is that there's at different levels, we all have a responsibility in responding to issues around violence, and blaming just the young people, blaming just their families, blaming just the community or local authority or the police or the government, all have the responsibility of responding or to respond to these particular issues. And I'll just leave you to think about that and how we as a country can respond to the violence.